Recording in progress.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In a few moments, we will begin the lecture with Dr. Maurício Melo de Meneses on the topic, Life, Work, and Values of Marshal Cândido Mariano da Silva Rondon. We ask everyone to turn off the cell phones or put them on silent mode. The lecture will be presented in Portuguese, and audio devices will be available for simultaneous translations to English, channel 1, and Spanish, channel 2. We ask everyone to stand at attention to the answers of the authorities. Entering the Inter-American Defense Board Delegates meeting room in the traditional soldiers' house, the General Director of the Inter-American Defense Board Secretariat, Lieutenant General Reinaldo Salgado Beato, accompanied by Minister Maurício André Olive Correa, Minister Consular for Administrative Affairs, Science, Technology, and Innovation, Culture, Education, Public Diplomacy, and Press. Major General Cesar Augusto Macedo Garcia, Inter-American Defense Board President of the Council of Delegates. Major General Eduardo Villegas Velasquez, Inter-American Defense Board Vice President of the Council of Delegates. Major General Raul Carlos Câmara Borges, Brazilian Defense and Air Force Attaché to the United States of America. Major General Maurício Vieira Gama, Brazilian Military Attaché to the United States of America. Rear Admiral João Batista Barbosa, Chief of the Brazilian Diplomatic Representation to the Inter-American Defense Board. Mr. Henry Widener, Portuguese Language Reference Librarian from the Library of Congress, and Dr. Maurício Melo de Meneses, speaker of this morning. We also would like to acknowledge the presence of diplomats, attachés, authorities, civilians, and military personnel at today's lecture. Please, we ask everyone to take the seats. This morning's activity will consist of a lecture presented by Dr. Maurício Melo de Meneses on the life, work, and values of Marshal Cândido Mariano da Silva Rondon. Dr. Maurício's curriculum vitae.
Engineer with postgraduate studies in executive education, culture, politics, and strategy, and certified board member by the Brazilian Institute of Corporate Governance. He serves as a board member at institutions such as the Mackenzie Presbyterian Institute, Liberal Institute, Evangelical University of Goiás, International Foundation for Freedom of Brazil, and Mackenzie Center for Economic Freedom. He is a member of the Historical and Geographical Institute of São Paulo and several literary and cultural academies. He has received honorary titles in both civilian and military decorations, including the Order of Defense Merit, Order of Military Merit, Order of Aeronautical Merit, and the Medal of Legislative Merit of São Paulo. He is currently managing partner at Planet Park, vice president of the Ethnos Institute, and of the Buriti Educational Foundation. He has previously served as CEO and chairman of the board of the Mackenzie Presbyterian Institute, secretary of the Supreme Council of the Presbyterian Church of Brazil, and president of organizations such as Lions Club and the Guidance International in Brazil. He is also a speaker and author of books in Portuguese and English, including Reformed Christianity and Rondon, the Marshal of Peace.
We would like to inform everyone that after the presentation, we will have time for questions. Major General Maurício, Brazilian Military Attaché, will present his remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, honored attendees, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this special presentation on the life, work, and values of Marshal Rondon, a revered Brazilian hero recognized internationally for his remarkable contributions. Today we gather to celebrate his legacy. And I'm privileged to introduce our esteemed speaker, Professor Maurício Meneses, my dear friend and namesake, who has traveled from Brazil at his own expense to share his passion and knowledge gained from thorough research on Marshal Rondon. We are honored to have such a distinguished audience today, including General Salgado, General César Macedo, General Villegas from the Inter-American Defense Board, generals from many countries. We have here military and civilian attachés from numerous countries. I'd like to highlight my friend Peter, who is the Dean of the WAMA, is an association of the military attaché. It's a great pleasure to have Peter here with us. I'd like to highlight we have a lot of people in Brazil now watching this presentation. We have many authorities, civilian and military authorities, students, teachers, professors from many schools and universities in Brazil. So those people, I'd like to highlight your presence, to thank for the attendance of those people from Brazil. Also, I'd like to highlight the presence of Mr. Henry from the Library of Congress. A great pleasure to have you here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, your presence underscores the significance of Marshal Rondon's legacy and the importance of this iconic figure in international scenario. I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to the Inter-American Defense Board for lending us these premises and making this event possible, especially because we have many speaker languages here, so the simultaneous translation will help us to transmit the essence of the presentation. We appreciate your support in strengthening bonds between the nations and our shared commitment to promoting cultural exchange. We also extend our gratitude to those joining us online via YouTube. Thank you for your participation and interest in Marshal Rondon's legacy. I had the privilege of attending the initial presentation of Professor Meneses when he launched the first version of his book 3.5 years ago. Today is a great moment due to the launch of the English version. His extensive research and publications have shed light on the life and achievements of Marshal Rondon, and we are honored to have him share his insights with us today. As a noted philatelist, Professor Meneses has uniquely illustrated his work with historical stamps, adding a remarkable visual dimension to his research. We look forward to hearing his perspectives on Marshal Rondon through his words and images. Before we begin, I would like to note that Professor Meneses, as it was already said, will deliver his presentation in Portuguese. For those who require translation, we have a simultaneous translation system available in English and Spanish. I hope that our skilled translators will be able to convey not only the content, but also the passion and essence of Professor Meneses' presentation, allowing all of us to fully appreciate the richness of his message. Please feel free to make use of this service, and we hope you find the presentation both informative and inspiring. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Professor Meneses to take the stage and share with us the remarkable story of Marshal Rondon. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Professor Meneses.
Senhores, bom dia. Nós vamos ouvir agora a história do
Good
Marechal
morning.
Rondon.
We're going to listen to the story of Marshal Rondon. And the first moment will be with us, is with us here. In a second moment, we are going to show the path telling about the life, the work and values of Marshal Rondon. My father, 5 months before my birth, was very sick and was living in a very poor place of Mato Grosso, an area with swamps, wrote a letter for my uncle Manuel in Cuiabá, the capital, and said, "Brother, I am very sick. I don't know if I will be able to see my son or daughter at birth, but if not, and if I die, I would like that at 7 years later, if you could come here and look for my son or my daughter and educate them in Cuiabá, in the capital. And we don't want more ignorant children, like all the children from here and myself. And then my father died immediately after, and my mother died when I was 2 years old. At 7 years of age, my uncle came to the swamps and showed this letter to my grandfather and said, he told him about my father's dream. My grandfather, with great difficulty, authorized my leaving to Cuiabá, the capital, and I studied there. And I even finished the regular course in a secondary school. And I was also assigned to the army. And since I was the best student of all the classes that I studied until then, I was motivated by my colleagues that were going to Rio de Janeiro to study engineering, to study the career. And that's how I spoke with my uncle after I had the blessing, his blessing, and my friends and myself took a boat along the Cuyabay River, and then after along the Paraná River until we arrived to Laos between Argentina and Uruguay. And then we take a plane and we went to Rio de Janeiro, 27 days of travel. In Rio de Janeiro, this beautiful city, we arrived on Monday, and then we went to the Academy of the Red Beach, and I discovered that the course that I studied was not accepted as a secondary school, and I had to study 3 years more. Some of my friends desisted and they went back to the capital of Cuiabá, but I, with a letter that my father wrote to my uncle and said that he wanted me to help the family in Brazil. And the war was starting, Brazil against Paraguay. And my uncle, who was a studied man, knew about the war. So I thought, I'm not going to go back. So I registered on the first year of the course. And I went to live in a residence for students. And I discovered that at the end of the year, I had to take a test that was equivalent to the second and third course. So I studied very hard that year, and I was the best student. And then I finished the test and I passed it. The next year, I was registered in the engineering course of the Red Beach of Brazil's Army. And I stayed there for 5 years, and I studied engineering. And I also finished the course on natural and physical sciences as the best student as well in the history of that academy. I learned also to speak English, French, and Spanish, and part of German. And I concluded the course. The next year, I was invited to be professor in that same academy in astronomy. And then I stayed 1 full year there, and then I was called for a mission that was to integrate Brazil. That was the capital with the capital of Rio de Janeiro and the Amazon through the telegraph lines. We reconstructed the Goiás part up to Cuiabá, to the capital of Mato Grosso, which is the center, the geodesic center of South America. But this history in 2025 had a teacher, Maurício, that is going to launch his book at the OAS in English and is going to tell the story. So the rest of my story. Well, it is an honor to be here with you. It is an immense honor. As General Maurício already said, several schools are already at this moment watching us from Brazil. I will be able to show you the great life of this Brazilian hero, Marshal Rondon. Here we are. This is a summary of this talk. The timeline of Marshal Rondon. Here we're taking a look where it says that in all the conferences I like to illustrate them with the stamps. I'm a collector of stamps, and I'm also a member of the association in Brazil. Well, the Marshal was born on May 5, 1865, in this very, very poor part of the province of Mato Grosso in Mimoso. His ascendants, paternal ascendants, Portuguese and Spaniards, and from his mother, from two tribes, the Terena and the Bororo, indigenous tribes. Within the academy, he had a professor that was a great master in his life, that taught him that his name was Benjamin Constant, and taught him the values of positivism at that time, and that love as a principle and the main weapon. After, the order as the basis, and finally progress as the goal. And even the flag of Brazil at that time was idealized by him. And he placed order and progress in his logo and message. And then we start with his life line, with the integration of Brazil. I want to tell you why this integration. Brazil in 1903 had already acquired the state of Acre that was owned before by Bolivia. And he agreed, or they agreed, and they bought part of that territory. It was a trade agreement between the two countries, and Brazil had the great Amazon, this immense part in the western central part with the Amazons, and without any type of contact by land. There was no air contact either, just by water. So we had an enormous territory, and we did not have any domain over it. And so the strategy of the government was to, together with the army, to set up all the telegraph lines. It was money that Brazil had at that time for the construction of the telegraph lines. And instead of the railroad, like what was happening in North America. So Rondon was designated to set up all these telegraph lines and to open in 30 meters wide the roads that would pass over there, with the purpose of keeping this enormous territory from all the northern part to the southern part of Brazil, and also colonize, because that was the strategy of the telegraphic lines. Here is the Amazon zone and part of the central western region. This part that you see here that we spoke about the meridional America, and now we have several representatives with us from this area. This that you can see in red, I don't know if you can all see it, but this is where the telegraphic lines were set up. And I was speaking about the Paraguayan war just a while ago, because Brazil was invaded by Paraguay, where we now is the Mato Grosso del Sur. And only 6 weeks after that, the capital, Rio de Janeiro, knew that Brazil had been invaded, because we didn't have any communication. So for 6 weeks, we didn't know that we were at war. So this was thanks to Rondon, because besides Rondon being a person that prepared himself enormously, he was a professor of economy. He had this, he was kind with his counterparts, and he knew that after this, after they concluded this mission, the progress would come to this area. So this is how they started with this strategy. And what happened? Well, let's look at the figures. Enormous, more than 7,000 kilometers of telegraph lines. And from the capital, Rio de Janeiro, all the way up to the Mount Roraima, which is the end of Brazil, and to the south in Brazil with the border with Paraguay. So there were several branches, and that was the only contact that we had. Can you imagine Rondon to be able to open and to have the authorization of the indigenous people to do this? And there was something quite interesting when he was in a region at the northern part of Mato Grosso, the indigenous people that were known as the Phantom Indians, because they were able to throw arrows that were silent, and no one heard when they were walking. And then Rondon took an arrow and he received an arrow, and his team went to rescue him. And he shouted, "No, no, don't shoot us. We don't." And after some days, this person that knew how to talk and had the correct strategies, and also learned as a military the knowledge, worked with Mr. Diodolite, and had also studied astronomy, and in such a way that nothing happened with the indigenous people. And he never had to swap booze or anything like that. He used to give some presents, but the results were marvelous despite all this. And then he goes back to Rio, and then he ended with all the area of Mato Grosso, which is an enormous area, and he arrived at Rio, and he said to his commander that he would like to present a project to the President of the Republic. And he was with his commander and went to see the President. And he said, "There are all types of animals, snakes, the vegetation. We don't have anything cataloged in Brazil. We need scientists, professors, botanics, zootechnicians, doctors, because there are diseases of all types, tropical diseases." And then the President of Brazil understood and designated all these people and all the resources, and then they started with the expeditions, not only to move with the telegraphic lines, but also the scientists. Can you imagine? More than 8,000 vegetal species were cataloged and then taken to the museum, National Museum in Rio. More than 5,000 vegetable species and more than 5,000 zoological specimens were identified, and many diseases that were cataloged by the doctors at that time. And then they all became famous. Adolfo, that entered the history as a great doctor in Brazil. Rondon was also able to discover this fort. Prince da Beira, that was built in the 17th century by the Portuguese to avoid the invasion of Spain that was foreseen. So this fort was built as well, and it was rediscovered and was put into use to safeguard our country. Now, in this picture that I showed about the meridional area, after complying with all the telegraphic lines, he was assigned to another very important fact, to set up the map of Brazil. We didn't have a map with our borders, so he started putting all the frames, and these were annexed to the territories in the different parts of Brazil. And Rondon, as a great strategist, and his team never had to kill anyone. He knew how to work with diversity. So there were so many things. More than 200 coordinates were discovered. Large rivers were discovered as well. So the history of the Marshal is of a person that dedicated his whole life with 50 years serving his country, Brazil. He was married in Rio. He had 7 children. His wife was a great ally of his, a great partner who also is part of history, because when he had difficulties he contacted her whenever he had a big problem, and she was friends with the presidents, and she would go to help him with that communication. So the story of Rondon is a wonderful story, but it is also a part of the story of his wife, because he had a lot to do with that. Rondon had 7 daughters and 1 son. One of his daughters died, and he was not able to be there when she died. There was no way of him being able to go. And he wrote a letter that communicated all his emotion. But to serve his country, and the letter that a father writes had talked about the blessing to his family and to Brazil. I believe that I'm going to need something. No, here it is. Well, then what happens? What happens that is extraordinary, that can call the attention of everyone, all those that are here in America? Well, Brazil until then was a very isolated country. And the former President Roosevelt in 1901 to 1909, who was also a colonel of the American Army, went to Africa on a safari and to learn the places where Livingston had gone through as well. And I will talk about Rondon at that time. When he died, the Africans took his heart out and buried it under a tree. And his body went back to England. And but the Africans kept his heart, and his body is buried in Winston in London. And the president wanted to go to Brazil, and he had contact with the government, and they called for Rondon to come to Rio. Rondon was still a colonel at that time, and he had started the scientific expeditions throughout Brazil and had contact with the United States and said, well, can you also bring some American scientists? And then Roosevelt, in fact, took these scientists to Brazil. And the intention was to discover the spring of a river, where the river is born, that is called the River of Doubt. They didn't know really through what basin it ran. So after this expedition, that was to find out where the river started. And then the president went through the same route that Rondon had taken, because there were no roads at that time to go to the border of Brazil with Argentina, Uruguay. In Uruguay, he took his boat, and then he arrived in Cáceres in the Mato Grosso province through Paraguay. And at the end of 1913, they started with the expedition that lasted about 6 months. And it was great in several aspects. Why? Because first they started with the expedition. First, the planning, and then they found this river, and there were terrible currents. It was a river of 1,500 kilometers long of length, and the boats got lost because of the water that broke them. The president contracted malaria, and there was no cure for that illness at that time. There is a study of the Oxford University that, but there still was no antidote for malaria. So the American president contracted this disease and was very sick. In one of the ships in that terrible current of the river, he was a very strong man. And he took a metal plaque that injured his leg, and then that's when the disease started, and the bacteria gave him high fevers, and the doctors did not know how to save him, and so they gathered his team and his own son, that was an engineer, and said, well, I don't have any way. I have lost more than 30 kilos. This fever doesn't leave me, and I want to be here. There's nothing else to do. I don't want to die here. I don't want to die like the other doctor of Africa. So he convinced his son in face of this difficulty, and also convinced his team. And they sent for Rondon, that was in another tent. And they tell everything to Rondon. And Rondon says, from now on, we're going to take care of you. We're going to take you, and our doctor is going to help you. And I like to tell in the medical courses, because there are many roots they make teas from roots, and he took these teas, and this man was cured with these teas. And with great difficulty, he arrived to Manaus, the capital of the Amazons, and He underwent surgery and then took a ship to Belém de Pará, and then another bigger ship. But from these trips, many things came out of it. And Theodore Roosevelt really admired this man that dedicated himself in a strategic way without allowing no indigenous people to be killed. And they had to go through many difficulties because they had to go through the indigenous areas. And he admired him. And I'm also going to talk about some impressive things that happened after this trip, like the results of this trip. And the documentary part is here in Washington at the library, the Congress Library. We have its representative here. And also all the materials of that time, all the botanic materials for the wilderness and animals, all this was taken to the History Museum, Natural History Museum. That is in New York, at the museum. Here we have some pictures that were taken from that expedition. I know that it is difficult to see them from afar, but these marked this history, especially for Brazil. And the scientists and much of the materials that were taken from the Amazons were transformed later into medicines. Rondon was known worldwide for his work. He was a person that defended all the indigenous people, that created schools for the indigenous peoples. Wherever he went through, 50% of the cash of the telegraphic lines were indigenous. And unfortunately, some others did this and gave the indigenous people liquors, booze, and he did exactly all the contrary. He always defended them and fought for their progress. In 2010, in 1910, there was the great encounter of the indigenous people in England, and Rondon had already written the statutes of the indigenous people for Brazil. The story says that 80% of the Brazilian statute was re-adequated from the statute of Rondon. So he spoke about the dignity of the originary people. He left a phrase that became a maxim for all the world that now has been forgotten. Die if it is necessary, but never kill. This phrase of his became well known. In the time, it was a phrase that the whole world would use. The world that wanted to know and negotiate without using force. But Rondon was that.
Além disso aí, de cuidar, fazer as linhas telegráficas,
Besides
de mapear o
the
Brasil do
telegraphic
sul ao
lines
norte,
and the map of Brazil from the south to the north, and there is a phrase of him. These were the two ends of Brazil, and I have the pleasure of getting to know all the military leaders from Peru and Colombia as well. He said in the region of Letícia, at the south of both countries and at the north of Brazil, the territory that was disputed a long time ago between Peru and Colombia, and many deaths had occurred already. Many. And so today that we are at the OAS, but before the OAS, there was another organization, the Pan American Union. And the Pan American Union was concerned because of that war, and then gathered and asked the president of Brazil for Brazil to become the intermediary. And who do you think they called? Rondon. Rondon was already a reserve general, and he was called to the palace in Rio de Janeiro by President Vargas, and he received a communique of 15 countries from here. And then Rondon, with this mission in mind of always helping the family and the country, understood that to help another country or two countries were also part of his mission. And then he spent 4 years with his team and marked everything. And not one speck of blood was thrown. So when he finished this, he was received by the president, by the ministers, ambassadors, and a great mass of people that were singing the national anthem. And Rondon had a very important phrase, which is good for all to keep in mind. When I was decorated for some reason, he said, what I did, any other could have done it. You only want to do it. So every time that he was going to be decorated, he had this same attitude in his soul, in his DNA, to comply with the mission as his work. And so it's not that he did not want to receive the award, but he said the same thing all the time. What I did, anyone else would have done it. You just want to do it. So I like to show, besides everything that is written here, so that we can have a better idea of everything that this great man did, that for many is the greatest hero of all times from Brazil. So he coordinated this national integration through the telegraph lines. And besides the telegraph lines and to open the roads, he was also an advisor of several presidents. The capital, Brasília, the president of Brazil, that was Celino Kubitschek, heard Rondon. He wanted to listen to that child that at the beginning, as I told you, was so poor, and he could have ended really bad. His father died 5 months before his birth, and his mother died when he was only 2 years old. And he was a child that made a great difference. Rondon made the difference in the midst of equals. And you and I, the second item, the indigenous people. He was a defender and gave dignity and taught and built schools and taught, gave work. So he worked a lot for the indigenous people. This Rondon Commission that is known in Brazil as the Rondon Mission. This is the scientific expedition that carried out more than 600 high-level scientific researches and that were published during this expedition by his team. Also, the Roosevelt-Rondon expedition, the importance that it had for Brazil to come out of the isolated image that we had, that was very important for the country. This participation, this integration. And he was also the director of engineering after finishing with these missions. He was the director of engineering of many large works in Brazil. Rondon has something interesting that I would like all of you to pay attention to. In the same way that he came with his hands clean and in the general works, because at that time, the telegraphic lines had the greatest part of the budget, and his hands were clean before and after. There was no accusation of any deviation of resources. This is an example of a man. He was also the person that did all the demarcations of Brazil, all the borders with the different countries, and several of you are here, and some others are watching us from online from your countries. And without any war, without any problem, he knew how to talk. He knew how to talk with and deal with diversity. He never took advantage of anything. He was a strategic man. He was so intelligent. He knew how to deal with others. He had an impressive integrity. And finally, his peace missions. So these are 7 important items that make Rondon and Darcy Ribeiro, that was the Minister of Education, in his book that he wrote about Rondon and succeeded Rondon among the indigenous people. They all said that Rondon is the greatest hero of Brazil. And several other writers have called him the greatest hero. And I like to show this part. These names that were given to him. Brazil has an entity that does all the research in Brazil, and they gave him the title of the civilizer of the hinterlands, of these arid lands of Brazil, the pacifist general. We are with many generals in this room, and many others that are watching us from Brazil, together with their teams. This title was given to him by Alberto Aristides when he came to Brazil. And then Roberto Aspen, Albert, the Professor Albert. It was also given by as a soldier, teacher, scientist, and he is in the book of Theodore Roosevelt, and I'm going to show what Roosevelt said about him and Einstein said about him. The protector of the indigenous people. This is the world phrase that was used at that time. The great chief, the Bororos, the indigenous people, he had to pacify them and give them their dignity. In the southern part of Mato Grosso, in the province of Mato Grosso, together with the border with Paraguay, the Bororos. And 1 year before his death, he went to Rio to look for Rondon and have lunch with him. And this was the last interview of Rondon. They wanted to take him because he had his hands clean. He had never killed an indigenous person. We also talked about the pioneer of the 20th century, the ambassador of France said that Rondon was a figure of the gospel. And an encounter that they had in India when this Brazilian minister was there, Darcy Ribeiro, then they mentioned Rondon and said that he was the great apostle, the pacifist after Gandhi. And finally, coming to the end of this presentation, some of the awards that he was given. Although he didn't like to receive so many recognitions and awards in his praise, what I did, anybody could have done it. You just want to do it. Well, this North American entity, together with the Geographic Society of New York, gave him the title of the Explorers Club New York that was given to the most famous people in the world. Roosevelt had 14, and he was also the Nobel of the explorers. And he also won 19, and the greatest award of France, and from Belgium, something incredible that very few people know. Even in Brazil, it's not known, that the Society of Scientists that met in England gave Rondon the title of the Meridian 52. It is the only person in the whole world that has received this meridian that starts in the North Pole and goes all the way not so far from America and cuts Brazil, and gave him this award and named it Rondon. And he continued repeating the same phrase. And then they gave him very important titles. In Brazil, he is the patron of communications. It was awarded to him as well. And the Brazilian Congress, Rondon was a general, a 3-star general. At that time, there were no 4-star generals. But the Congress in 55, well, he was 90 years old and quite sick. And he had lost sight of one eye, had glaucoma and the malaria that made him suffer so much. But they gave him the title of the Marshal, the only that did not go to war. So it's an honorary title. And it was, he won with 100% of the votes of all the Brazilian Congress. He won this award and title of Marshal. And the day that he was awarded, the president of Brazil came with him, and he repeated his same famous phrase, "I did what anybody other person could have done." And he never thought that he deserved it. And something interesting happened. 3 times he was also he was also launched for the Nobel Prize by Einstein for the and there is a movie on Rondon and the opening of telegraph lines without killing not even one indigenous person. And he liked to write in his own hand about the people that he met along this way. And no one knew about this in Brazil. And he sent this letter directly, and the letter is in the Museum of Tel Aviv, and in 53. So it shows that he was also appointed as one of the winners of the Nobel Prize. They didn't give him the Nobel Prize. In 1957, the Geographic American Society that gave him the title in 19, and 90 institutions worldwide, all of America, European countries, and the last interview in 1957 by a reporter of the Manchete magazine from Brazil. And everything seems to indicate that you're going to be awarded next year. It is a wonderful interview. And he says his great phrase, an example of life. In January in 1958, he died. People were convinced that he was going to win this award, but they gave him a posthumous homage. And here I want to leave these two phrases and see how beautiful. It's sensational. The American president, Theodore Roosevelt, and Albert Einstein. I'm going to read the one of the president that says, as a man, Rondon embodies the virtues of a priest, a Puritan of an unimaginable perfection in modern times, and as a professional, his scientific mastery and breadth of knowledge make him worthy of being called a sage. Later on, the American president said that he saw two marvels in the Americas. In this representation here, to the north, the Panama Canal, and at the south, Rondon. To conclude, I would like to leave this phrase with you that is beautiful. Rondon believed in a better world and acted to make it real. He overcame obstacles and brought peace, expanded and connected, and loved his country very deeply, engraving his name in the history of humanity. So this was Rondon. And finally, here is his famous phrase that you're probably tired of hearing me repeat it, but he said, what I did, anyone could do, as long as they truly want to. But remember that he studied very much, he prepared himself very much, and I like to give this talk for all the students just to show them that it is possible. It is possible to make the difference in the midst of equals. So let's rondonize. What is that? What is rondonize? The former minister of Brazil, Darcy Ribeiro, who left this phrase, and I like it very much. Wherever I go, I say, this verb doesn't exist, of course, rondonize. And what does it mean? It means to do things with ethics, good things, to advance, to negotiate, to conquer obstacles, not to be afraid, go ahead, study. We can put N adjectives here. And so this is what it is. Let's rondonize. And we hope that one day this verb maybe can be recognized in Brazil. And wherever we go, we might be able to show it. And finally, when it finishes, we're going to have the launching of the 4th edition of this book, the MARSHAL Rondon. And we want to give it away to you. this is the story of this great Brazilian. And I hope that this talk has stayed in your heart, because it is important for us to Rondonize. It is important for all the countries. He was a man that knew how to connect. He knew how to love his fellows, and he knew how to face difficulties. So this is Marshal Rondon, that for many is part of the heroes of our homeland, the greatest hero of Brazil and of all times for many. So thanks to the OAS and to all of you that are here today representing our countries, brothers, neighbors, brothers from Brazil, Brazil that is always with open arms and always Rondonized everyone. And here, wholeheartedly, I would like to thank you all that are watching us in Brazil so that we can continue Rondonizing. Thank you very much.
We inform the audience that we have now a short time for questions.
Recently, la historia muy interesante de un soldado.
It is a very interesting story of a soldier, the effect of the doctrine that he imposed in this period of history in the Army of Brazil.
Como foi o efeito da doutrina no exército de Brasil de hoje?
And how it affected the Army of Brazil today, thanks to what he did.
Rondon é exemplo para todo o exército brasileiro. Ele, além de ser o patrono do exército, da arma de comunicação, eu quero citar aqui que o ano passado,
That
o comandante
in
do
the
exército
past,
brasileiro,
the commander of the Brazilian
ele
army
nos convocou
in force, it
para
called us
grande evento que teve
to have a
em
great
Brasília,
event that
com
occurred in Brazil
todo o efetivo de Brasília, de
with
todos
all
os
the
oficiais do exército.
officers of the Army of Brazil.
Deu a missão para que eu pudesse
And the mission was
fazer essa palestra semelhante ao que eu fiz hoje.
to give this talk
O nosso comandante,
as I did today. So our commander
nós tivemos essa oportunidade. Nós entendemos
and
que
all of
aquilo
us
ali
had this opportunity. We understood that
resgate da história para muitos que talvez os mais novos não
this was
conheciam.
necessary to rescue the history that probably the younger generations don't know the story with so many details. So Brazil,
Como civil, entendo que nós continuamos com
in
esta
my understanding as a civilian, continues with
mesma forma que Rondon fez.
this same way of doing things as Rondon had, to be a pacifist country. Our army is going to be trained for the need that may arise, but always searching and following the story of Rondon. I think there's another question.
Sí, bueno, decía que valoro mucho su valoración en la presentación sobre el mariscal
Yes,
Rondon,
It has been great to have had the opportunity to listen to you because your intervention has been very educational.
Bien, bueno, mencionaba que valoro
I
mucho
was
su
saying that
intervención sobre
I value your
la historia
intervention
del
greatly
Rondón, que ya había
about the
tenido la
history of
oportunidad
Rondon
de
because I had the
conocerlo,
opportunity to
fue muy
get to know him
edificante,
before, but this was very
amplió
educational
nuestro
because you
conocimiento sobre
opened
su
my
vida.
knowledge
Y mi
about
pregunta
him
va
more.
ligada
And my
al
question
contexto
is about the
militar
context, the
y
military
también
context, and
contexto
also
histórico como
the
tal,
historical
para
context,
saber qué
to
es su
know
influencia como una
his
persona
influence
pacifista,
as a pacifist,
donde hoy día
where today
tenemos en el
we have,
contexto militar
in the
global
military context, globally
la
speaking,
propia doctrina
the
militar también
military doctrine as,
y me gustaría tener
and
su
I would like
valoración
to know
sobre esa
what you think about
ideología
that
que él
ideology
básicamente
that he
enseñó y
taught
fomentó
and promoted
sobre lo
about
que es no recurrir a la
not
violencia
resorting to
y
violence,
cómo en el
and
contexto militar,
how, in the military
todo lo que
aspect,
vemos en el día
with
de hoy,
everything that we see today,
cómo pudiera transformarse
how could
esa
this be
filosofía
transformed? How can you transform this
que
philosophy
nosotros
into
practicamos
what we
o
practice today
ejercemos en las
or
operaciones
exercise
militares?
in our
Pero me
military
gustaría
operations?
más que
But I
todo
would
conocer
like
su valoración,
to know your
tomando en cuenta
evaluation, taking into
esas
account
enseñanzas
the
de explorador y
teachings
pacifista
as
sin
an
recurrir
explorer and
a la
pacifist
violencia que tenemos.
without resorting to violence. Thank you.
Excelente pergunta.
Excellent,
vejo que-
excellent question. I see that
Nós temos que, como exército,
we,
nos
as an army,
organizar
have to organize
como
ourselves
a própria Exército, Aeronáutica, Marinha, tem que nos preparar. Porque
as the
nós ter boas academias,
prepare
boa
ourselves for
formação,
missions and
me
have a good
orgulho muito do
academies and a
Brasil,
good training, good
tem
preparation. And
excelente,
I'm proud of
conheço os
Brazil
melhores lugares,
because
a área de inteligência
Brazil,
em Brasília é uma das melhores do mundo.
I know several intelligence areas of Brazil that are one of the best in the world. Several countries have used it already, but I understand
Importante nessa
that
história de Rondon
the important issue in this story
é que é
about Rondon
possível,
is that it is possible.
possível conversarmos
It is possible
sem
to
vender
talk
nossos princípios do país,
without
mas é
selling our
possível a gente
principles as
ir
a country.
conversar.
But it is also
Eu acho
possible
que
to go
falta
and
isso,
talk.
a meu modo
I
de
think that what
pensar.
is missing is
Mas
this.
eu vejo que
As
é
I'm
possível.
concerned,
Se
I
nós aqui
see
nessa
that it is
sala
possible if in this
entendermos
room
isso, que é
we
possível,
understand
e
that it is
começar a
possible.
passar para os nossos
And
alunos,
then
seguidores,
we start
alunos que porventura nós vamos ter, quem vai
passing
nos
this to our
substituir,
students
seguidores que eu estou
and
falando
the
a
students
extensão
that
da
we're going to
palavra.
have and that are going to replace us.
Nós temos esse exemplo,
If
por
we have
exemplo, nós
followers in
tivemos
that
exemplos do
sense,
mundo.
successors
Na época
that
não foi
will
só
be
para o Brasil.
examples.
Tanto isso,
This example
eu
was
não
not only
coloquei
for
aqui nem a
Brazil.
metade das premiações.
I
Foram
have not even
50
placed
prêmios. E
half
eu não
of the
gostava
awards
disso.
that he received because there were so many
Então,
others.
eu
He
acho
didn't
que
like
eu
them.
tenho certeza que
But
um
I believe
exemplo
that,
para
and I
ser
am
seguido
sure
por
that he is
todos.
an example that should
Nós
be
vamos
followed by
conseguir
all of us.
que o
We are
outro
going to
lado,
be
igual o
able
senhor perguntou,
to have the
entenda.
other side
Nem
the same
sempre,
as
mas
you
nós
have
podemos
asked,
sim fazer.
understand, because not always,
Compreender.
but we can do it.
Então, a
We can make
estratégia
them
é
understand.
importante.
So the strategy is
Eu creio que é
important.
sentimento que todos
I
nós
believe
temos
that
que
it is a
preparar sim,
feeling that we all like.
mas
Yes, we have to prepare
nós também
ourselves
nós
well,
podemos preparar
but
para
we can also
saber lidar com a diversidade
prepare ourselves to be able
de
to
uma forma
deal with
excelente
diversity
para, vamos dizer, o
in a
conflito
way
Então,
in which we don't
acredito que
have to
podemos sim,
go to
podemos
physical
fazer isso aí
confrontation. So I do believe
e
that we
podemos
can do
virar
that.
essa chave para muitos
And
termos
we can
ideias de
turn
fazer esse trabalho de
the key for many other ideas.
Doutor, uma pergunta em português aqui.
One question in
As
Portuguese.
Forças Armadas brasileiras, elas têm patronos. As
The
suas
Armed
armas,
Forces of Brazil
Marinha, tem
have
das suas especialidades, a mesma coisa acontece com
patrons
o
in
Exército,
their
coisa que não acontece com os outros
specialties,
países.
and
Os
it also
países,
happens with
alguns
the
países
army,
têm, mas
but
nem
it doesn't
todos.
happen with
Só
other
pode correr um
countries.
pouco
Other
como foi
countries
a eleição
have
ou a
them,
não
others
nomeação
don't.
de
So can you
Rondon para ser o
explain
patrão da arma de comunicações?
how was this appointment of Rondon as the patron of communications? Because the same as Rondon, as he got the Marshal title due to the unanimous vote of the Brazilian Congress. And I think that it is possible to expand this to the other countries, brother countries here. I think that all the countries should have someone like Rondon as the patron, and also be the patron like of, as he was called, communications patron, because he knew how to communicate. He knew how to communicate in all the magnitude of the word. There are several ways to communicate. And he knew the way to negotiate. He knew how to communicate well. So we can motivate our countries to have figures that can be identified as a person that was very skillful to communicate in several moments of life. So I think that the question is very timely because we are in the house of the Americas, and I believe that we can think on that. Why not?
Bom, muito obrigado, em primeiro lugar,
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the talk.
maravilhosa e como
It was really marvelous. And as a Brazilian, I thank you as well, because it made me get to know much more about this extraordinary Brazilian. Of course, everybody has heard talk about him at school, but not with this depth. My question is about the relationship between Rondon and President Roosevelt. Why? Because both are the giants, but they have something that is close and many other things that separated them. Many visions about the world that were almost opposite. So while President Roosevelt was everything except a pacifist, here in the Americas mainly, he was known because of his big steep policy. No European power could have any type of connection here with any country, any American country, if not the United States would intervene. So it would be an almost aggressive policy at that with the countries in this region. And he was a military that used it in the war with Cuba and the independence of Cuba against Spain and many other things. So even internally, the way in which everybody saw their original people, the indigenous people, was very different as well. Rondon always had this look, as you mentioned very well. Die if it is necessary, but never kill. Roosevelt, no, he was the opposite, a little. The inheritance that he left for the original people was not so positive. So, in face of these visions of such different worlds, what was the relationship between them? It makes me believe that maybe at the beginning there were so many differences. It seems that at the end, not so many, because of the way in which Roosevelt talked about him later. And you think Rondon could have taught Roosevelt? Thank you. Also an excellent question. But before that, I'm going to start with the context, speaking about Einstein. Why Einstein talked about Rondon? Because Einstein did not see any indigenous person killed in Brazil. So he was a professor of the University of Winston and had great difficulties with America. And so he saw Rondon's life and he called him the pacifist general. Roosevelt had many problems with Rondon at the very beginning, even with the indigenous peoples. They had to go down at the shores of the rivers, so it was a very difficult starting point. In the expedition, there was a person that was killed. Rondon at a certain time wanted to close. Well, the thing is that this is being taped, but Rondon and the president passed with the title of president, a president of America, of North America. And after these conflicts, he understood him. After the intervention in his health, because Rondon did not allow him to die in La Mata. And then he started to understand him, because I have read the letters that were exchanged between the two men. It is something impressive, the transformation that happened in his life. It's a pity that he died too young. His stay, the malaria, helped to victimize him too soon. But at the beginning, yes, it was very difficult. And Roosevelt later on understood this issue of kindness and negotiation and order as a basis, and then a progress with the kindness, but it was difficult.
Thanks for all the questions. And now, as a form of appreciation for the brilliant presentation given by Dr. Maurício, Major General Maurício, Brazilian Military Attaché, invites Lieutenant General Salgado, the General Director of the Inter-American Defense Board Secretariat, to hand out a token to the speaker.
Dr. Maurício, em nome de toda a assistência.
Dr. Maurício, on behalf of all the attendants at the IADB and here at the Casa del Soldado, I would like to thank you for your excellent presentation about Marshal Rondon from our country. Marshal, that is also the patron of communications. And the importance of Rondon was the importance of conducting all the operations. He was a military, but he had his own logo. Never kill, die if necessary. So the values that he promoted inspire us today. And the integration of the operations and the dialogue among countries to solve our differences. With these brief words, I would like to give you just a token of our appreciation for your presentation, and at the same time, we want an applause. We request an applause for you.
Eu fiz, qualquer poderia fazer, basta querer.
What I did, anybody could have done. You only have to want to do it.
The activity is now concluded. We would like to thank all those who attended this cultural event, which portrayed the life of a great military figure in Brazilian history. We ask everyone to stand for the departure of the authorities. We inform that Dr. Maurício will be granting some books for the audience at the entrance hall. Thank you very much. You have all a good day.